The Indonesian foreign minister says he hopes that people smuggling will be criminalised in his country, quote, sooner rather than later. Notorious people smuggler Captain Bram looks like escaping a fine despite smuggling an estimated 1,500 asylum seekers through Indonesia to Australia over the past decade, because people smuggling in Indonesia is not an offence. Sky News chief political reporter Kieran Gilbert has spoken to Indonesia's Foreign Minister Marty Natalegawa in Jakarta about people smuggling and also, in particular, the continuing standoff in the port of Merak, where some 240 asylum seekers are still refusing to disembark their vessel.
Foreign Minister Marty Natalegawa, thank you very much for your time today. I want to start by asking you about the case of around 250 asylum seekers off the port of Merak. They've been there now for 4 months. Recently you said we have to bring on board Australia's engagement again. What did you mean by that?
Well, in the same way that we have always, our two countries have always been part of the solution whenever we have facing a common challenge. The most recent one, of course, was the Oceanic Viking situation. And now we are facing a similar situation vis-a-vis the Merak case. And while it's not quite the same in terms of the nature of its background and where it is coming from, but I think the same spirit of wanting to engage Australia, wanting to compare notes with Australia about how we can move the issue forward is one that is instructing us as well. But you know, we'll find a good way of working together on this again, I'm sure.
Other than forcibly helping to remove these people, I suppose the other alternative is to entice them off. Do you want the government to do something similar to what they did with those on board the Oceanic Viking?
Well, obviously the option of forcible eviction or removal is not really something that is very attractive and not something that certainly uppermost in our strategy. You are quite correct. It's one of enticing, encouraging them to come off to come down from the boat. Basically, we need to entice them to come down with the prospect of the earlier they come down, the quicker it will be for them to be processed, but without queue jumping, because at the same time you are aware that there is similar case situations elsewhere in Indonesia, and we don't want to see a situation that the way we handle this Merak case becomes like a pull factor to other similar situations. So we need a balance here. And as I said before, Australia has always been part of the solution. I'm sure on this issue as well, we are having good conversation. But first and foremost, this situation of having these people on board for 4 months on the vessel is really, you know, by whatever criterion, is not a happy one. So the sooner they come off from the boat, the better it will be for everyone, I think. Yeah.
You recently had the ambassador for people smuggling, Peter Woolcott, in Jakarta. Was there any progress made in those talks?
Yes, Ambassador Woolcott was here more in a generic sense, to be honest, not just focusing on Merak, but in accordance with his portfolio, to compare notes, as I said, to exchange and to draw lessons learned from the Oceanic Viking situation. But above all, to move forward on the common agenda that our two countries have in terms of the comprehensive approach. We wish to address this situation in a comprehensive way by bringing on board onto the debate the question of the country of origin, transit and destination. And this comprehensive approach is one that Australia very much is sharing with Indonesia.
But encouraging greater engagement from Australia, does that mean that you want Australia to provide an incentive like they did the Oceanic Viking people?
Not necessarily, no. I said because if we were to pursue only that path, then we'll end up with that pull factor that I mentioned before. I don't want Indonesia and Australia to be seen to be you know, the two countries that will facilitate the movement of people away from this conflict situation, their country of origin. So it has to be well balanced and not always, you know, otherwise it creates a sense of that pull factor. So it has to be properly. That's why I'm very keen to have countries of origin very much in the debate, Sri Lanka or Afghanistan or Iraq or Burma, Myanmar as well, and where they are relevant. Yeah.
You've said that you don't want an ad hoc approach to this.
No.
Does that mean that you would be reticent to intervene, like in the case of the Merak boat, if you received a similar request from the Prime Minister again?
Well, no, we have very good conversation between our two governments at all levels, between our head of state and also at the ministerial levels. So I will never be unhappy to receive calls and have conversation with my counterpart, Minister Stephen Smith. But when I say that we want to have a more comprehensive approach, so that we don't reinvent the wheel each time we deal with a situation, we must have a more thought-through, predictable mechanism in dealing with these kind of issues. So it's more in that way.
Because the one-offs haven't worked so well in recent times.
The one-off, it has worked vis-a-vis the oceanic Viking. It helped address what was then a problem, a challenge. It worked then, but we think that we ought to have a more predictable and thought-through kind of approach. We don't want, as I said, each time having to reinvent the wheel, each time having to have such a massive concentration of attention at the highest level of government. So we need to get things done in a more technical way and a predictable way as well.
The captain of that particular boat looks like he might be just receiving a fine for sailing offences because people smuggling is not a crime in Indonesia. Is that part of the
Yes.
holistic approach that is needed?
Well, this whole issue about the criminalization of people smuggling and trafficking is something that is obtaining a great deal of attention here in Indonesia. In the absence of such legislative framework, it has not in any way impacted on our capability and ability and indeed political commitment to pursue and to render ineffective the traffickers. But ideally, we ought to have the requisite legislative framework, which we are now working on. And
what sort of time frame would you expect on that?
I guess sooner rather than later. I can't. You know, I mean, Indonesia being a democracy that it is now, and Parliament has such a huge agenda in terms of legislative agenda. So we'll have to get it done sooner rather than later, as I often say. But what must be underscored is that the absence of such a legislative framework, or even the fact that Indonesia is not a signatory to the UN Convention on the refugees, it hasn't in any way impacted our ability to be of useful and helpful contribution to the way we handle this kind of issue.
There's been another discussion in the pipeline for some time, a prisoner transfer deal.
Yes, that's another one of those, yeah.
Yeah, and is there any progress on that? Is there any sign that might be secured?
This is another issue that I know that our two governments have been in discussion on. Again, the issue is because we do not have the requisite domestic national legislation that deals with such possibility of a transfer of prisoners agreement. So we have to first and foremost fill in the lacuna, the legal gap that we have here in Indonesia before we can contemplate the idea of having these bilateral arrangements. We understand the rationale behind it, and we would like to be able to support it even, because there are circumstances and situations where for humanitarian purposes, principally, we ought to be able to facilitate the transfer of prisoners, this transfer of the sentencing, it's not exchange of prisoners, but the transfer of sentencing, so that the remaining period of one's sentence is carried out or implemented in the country of origin. Yeah.
3 Australians on death row as part of the Bali Nine.
Yes.
If their appeals fail, what are the prospects for a plea for clemency?
There's several steps, of course, that can be gone through. The ultimate remedy would be for the application for amnesty. That is beyond following the exhaustion of the legal procedure, amnesty vis-a-vis the head of state. I can understand the efforts by the Australian government to have the sentence addressed, the issue addressed, because we do similar effort with respect to our nationals overseas when they face themselves similar situation. We make every effort to try to commute the sentence. So I understand why the Australian government is doing it.
What would the prospects be for clemency?
That is, we'll get there when the issue is actually submitted and considered. But the crime on which they have been convicted is an extremely serious one, as you would no doubt understand. No one can be accused of being, Indonesia cannot be accused of being misleading anyone in terms of what would be the implications of people who brings in banned substances.
Our government warns in its travel advisory that Australians should reconsider travel to Indonesia due to the very high threat of terrorist attack. Is that frustrating to the Indonesian government, that language, that sort of warning?
Actually, I've learned to sort of not to provide a running commentary on the ebbs and flows of Australian government travel advisory, and nor am I interested in second-guessing or entering into the mindset or the rationale behind the way the advisory is crafted. We know, as a matter of based on experience, that no one country can give 100% guarantee against terrorist attack. It can strike at any time, at anywhere, at any place. So I don't want to second-guess the Australian government's responsibility to issue advisory. But in the final analysis, I guess the decision to whether to visit or not visit Indonesia is for the individual to make. And I just hope that such advisory doesn't create any practical difficulties, for example, in terms of travel insurance and the like. As long as such advisory do not create insurmountable barrier, then it's something I guess the Australian government is they have every right to do, and as long as it's based on a good, solid information.
The Indonesian president is due to visit Australia in the next few weeks. The government links seem quite strong. Absolutely. You studied it in Australia.
Yes, yeah.
You probably have a better sense than most. Why do you think the people links aren't as strong as the government links? And why isn't there a greater awareness of Indonesia in Australia and vice versa?
I think we need to modernize the relationship. We need to make it more contemporary. I can understand why there is a lag, because the transformation in Indonesia has been so profound and so happened all in a very short period of time, that maybe Australians have certain stereotype about Indonesia that is no longer quite current. Likewise, Indonesians may have certain stereotypes about Australia that is no longer current. For example, Australia now very much sees itself as part of the region. It has a very strong Asia-Pacific outlook and a rich contributor of what Asia is all about. This fact maybe is not often understood in Indonesia, the fact that Australia is a multicultural society as well. So I think both sides needs to reboot our perception of our respective societies, and as governments, it's our responsibility to facilitate this kind of better understanding. But at the same time, I wouldn't want to say as if, in the final analysis, I do believe that the people contact is the most useful and the most valued aspect to any bilateral relations. And I would say that all will be well. I mean, the best is yet to come in Indonesia-Australia relations.
One final question. The US President, Barack Obama, spent some time here as a child, 4 years as a child. He's due to visit Indonesia next month, as he is Australia. He described himself, I think, as the first Pacific president. Has that different world focus had any real benefits yet, do you think?
Yes, well, the prospect of the visit by President Obama to Indonesia, for obvious reasons, with the fact that he had spent some years in Indonesia as a young boy, a little boy, is one that is exciting many Indonesians. I think, of course, he would go on travel to Australia. Very useful as well to have President of the United States going to Indonesia and Australia in one trip. But beyond personalities, beyond question of sentiments, it's also about where Indonesia and U.S. role is at the moment. I think we are seeing Indonesia and United States, as also Indonesia and Australia, as strong partners in fellow democracies, strong anchor in our in the Pacific region. So we can become part of the group of countries that promote democracy, promote human rights in a way that is in a positive way, and not way that is pontificating and blaming others. But all in all, a very happy situation. Indonesia-US, Indonesia-Australia relations, trilateral relationship, extremely important for our Pacific region.
Foreign Minister, thanks for your time. It's good to meet you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.